They called him the Wolf of Northumberland. Society whispered that Julian Thorne didn't marry women. He collected them, and they rarely survived the winters at his estate. When Eleanor Sterling was sold to him to cover her father's gambling debts, she walked down the aisle expecting a death sentence. The entire church watched, waiting for her to break. She couldn't even look him in the eye. But at the altar, the terrifying Duke didn't strike her. Instead, he leaned down and whispered a secret so scandalous, so unexpected that Eleanor didn't faint. She blushed crimson. What did he say? And why was the most dangerous man in England actually her only hope? The rain in London did not wash things clean. It only pressed the grime deeper into the cobblestones. Inside the Sterling townhouse on Wimpole Street, the atmosphere was suffocating thick with the scent of stale brandy and panic. Eleanor Sterling sat by the window, watching the droplets race against the glass. She was 22, possessing a sharp intelligence that her father, Lord Arthur Sterling, found tiresome, and a dowry that had long since vanished across the green felt of gambling tables. "You are being unreasonable, Eleanor," Arthur snapped, pacing the Persian rug that was already mortgaged to a lender in Cheapside. He looked older than his 50 years, his face a map of broken capillaries and broken promises. "The arrangement is generous. It saves this house. It saves your sisters from the workhouse." "It is a sale, father, not a marriage," Eleanor said, her voice steady, despite the trembling of her hands in her lap. And to him, the Duke of Blackwood, the papers say his first wife threw herself from the parapets because of his cruelty. Gossip, idle hen-pecking. Arthur waved a hand dismissively, though he wouldn't meet her eyes. "Julian Thorne is a man of immense wealth. He requires a hostess for Blackwood Manor. You are poised, you are educated, and frankly you are out of options." Eleanor stood up her silk skirts, rustling a sound that used to whisper of luxury, but now sounded like the rustle of dry leaves before winter. "Tell me the truth. How much do you owe him?" Arthur stopped pacing. He poured another drink, the crystal decanter clinking against the glass. "Everything. The estate in Kent, the townhouse, the horses. I signed the deed to the Sterling name over to him 3 nights ago at the St. James Club." He turned to her, and for the first time, Eleanor saw true fear in his eyes. It wasn't fear for her, it was fear for himself. "He holds the notes, Eleanor. If you do not marry him by the end of the month, he will call the debts. I will be in debtor's prison, and you will be on the street. He specifically asked for you." A chill that had nothing to do with the damp London air settled in Eleanor's marrow. Julian Thorne, the Duke of Blackwood, a man who rarely came to London, preferring the savage winds of the north. He was a phantom in society, richer than God and twice as judgmental. "Why me?" she whispered. "We have never met." "I don't know," Arthur lied. Eleanor could always tell when he lied. His left eyelid twitched. "Perhaps he saw you at the opera last season. It doesn't matter. He is coming here this afternoon to sign the contracts. You will be civil. You will be obedient. And you will save us." Eleanor looked back at the rain. She thought of William the solicitor's clerk, who had once written her poetry, a sweet, harmless love that had been crushed by her father's ambition years ago. There would be no poetry with the Duke, only cold stone and colder silences. "I will do it," she said, her voice hollowing out. "But I will never forgive you." The clock on the mantel chimed 3. Precisely on the last stroke, the heavy iron knocker of the front door slammed. Eleanor sat on the velvet settee, her spine rigid. She wore her best dress, a navy blue taffeta, that was 2 seasons out of fashion, high-necked and severe. She wanted to look like a governess, not a prize. She wanted him to see that she was not soft. When the butler Higgins opened the parlour doors, the room seemed to shrink. Julian Thorne was not the elderly, gout-ridden aristocrat she had hoped for. He was a mountain of a man, standing well over 6 feet. He wore a coat of black wool, damp from the rain, and he brought the smell of ozone and storm into the floral stuffiness of the room. His hair was dark-touched, with premature grey at the temples, and his face was hard angles, a sharp jaw, a nose that had been broken once, and eyes the colour of a winter sea. He did not bow. He simply walked into the room, dominating the space. "Lord Stirling," Julian said. His voice was a deep baritone, rough like gravel grinding under a boot. He ignored Arthur's outstretched hand. "Your Grace," Arthur stammered, sweating. "May I present my daughter, Eleanor?" Julian turned his gaze to her. Eleanor felt stripped bare. He didn't look at her body. He looked at her face, studying her eyes with an intensity that made her want to run. He walked toward her, his steps heavy. "Miss Stirling," he said. He didn't offer a hand. "Do you understand the terms of this transaction?" Eleanor stood. She had to tilt her head back to look him in the eye. "I understand that my father has sold me to cover his vices, Your Grace. I am the currency." Arthur gasped. "Eleanor, apologize at once." Julian raised a hand, silencing the older man instantly. A flicker of something amusement respect passed through his cold eyes. "Currency," Julian repeated, tasting the word. "An honest woman. A rare thing in London." He stepped closer, invading her personal space. The heat radiating from him was palpable. "I do not require your affection, Miss Stirling. I require your loyalty, your presence in my home, and your ability to manage a household that has gone to rot. In exchange, I clear your father's ledger and provide you with protection." "Protection from what?" Eleanor challenged her heart, hammering against her ribs. "From poverty, or from you?" The room went silent. Arthur looked as though he might faint. Julian leaned in. "From the wolves, Miss Stirling. You have no idea how many there are." He pulled a folded document from his coat pocket and tossed it onto the low table. "The license is obtained. The ceremony will be in 3 days at St. Jude's. No guests, just the witnesses." He turned his back on her, addressing her father. "If she is not there, Stirling, I will have you in Newgate Prison before sunset. Do we understand each other?" "Yes, Your Grace. Absolutely," her father squeaked. Julian turned back to Eleanor one last time. "Wear something warmer than that dress, Eleanor. The North is unforgiving to delicate things." Then he was gone, leaving Eleanor trembling with a mixture of terror and a strange burning anger. He had spoken to her as an equal in grimness, not a piece of furniture, but the threat in his eyes was real. She was marrying a monster. St. Jude's Chapel, 3 days later. The church was empty, save for the vicar, a terrified clerk, and her father who stood in the back, weeping silent tears of relief rather than sorrow. Eleanor wore a dress of cream satin, hastily altered from her mother's old trunk. It smelled faintly of lavender and mothballs. She held a bouquet of white roses that were already wilting at the edges. As she walked toward the altar, her legs felt like lead. Julian Thorne stood waiting. He was dressed in formal morning wear, looking devastatingly handsome and utterly unapproachable. His expression was granite. He looked like a man attending a funeral, not a wedding. The vicar began the service, his voice echoing in the hollow stone chamber. "Dearly beloved, we are gathered here." Eleanor stared at the floor. She could feel the heat of the Duke standing beside her. She felt small, trapped. She thought of the rumors, the dead wife, the servants who fled his manor in the night. She was signing her life away to a brute. Tears pricked her eyes, hot and humiliating. She lowered her head further, letting her veil hide her face, refusing to look at the man who now owned her. "Do you, Julian Edward Thorne, take this woman?" "I do," he said. The words were clipped devoid of emotion. "And do you, Eleanor Jane Sterling?" She hesitated. The silence stretched. She could feel her father's panic from the back of the room. She took a breath. I do." The vicar nodded nervously. "You may kiss the bride." This was it. The moment of contact. Eleanor flinched as Julian turned toward her. She squeezed her eyes shut, waiting for a rough, possessive claim. She expected him to grab her, to mark his territory. Instead, she felt a gloved hand gently cup her chin. He tilted her face up. She opened her eyes. He was staring at her, his face inches from hers. For a moment, the hardness in his eyes softened into something urgent, something intense. He didn't kiss her lips. He leaned past her face, his breath warm against her ear. The guests, the few witnesses, leaned in expecting a romantic declaration or a threat. "Don't look at your father," Julian whispered, his voice a low rumble that vibrated through her spine. "Look at the man in the back pew, the one in the grey coat. He has a gun pointed at your heart. I am standing between you and him. Smile, Eleanor. Act like you adore me, or we both die right now." Eleanor's blood ran cold. She froze, her eyes widening. A gun Julian pulled back slightly, his eyes searching hers. "Trust me," he mouthed. The world tilted on its axis. The monster wasn't capturing her. He was shielding her. Without thinking, instinct took over. Eleanor didn't faint. She didn't scream. A flush of adrenaline and shock rose up her neck, staining her cheeks a deep, vivid pink, a blush that looked to the outside world like the reaction of a woman overwhelmed by passion. She reached up her hands, gripping the lapels of his coat, and she forced a dazzling, trembling smile. "My lord," she breathed loud enough for the room to hear. Julian's eyes widened a fraction. He hadn't expected her to play the part so well. He leaned in and pressed a kiss to her forehead, protective, firm and lingering. "Let's get you out of here, Duchess," he muttered against her skin. He turned her toward the aisle, placing his large body deliberately between her and the shadowed corner of the church. As they walked, Eleanor risked a glance. She saw the man in the grey coat. He was slipping a pistol back into his jacket, turning to leave his mission, evidently aborted by the Duke's intervention. Eleanor's hand tightened on Julian's arm. Her father had sold her not just for debt, but into a war she didn't understand. The carriage awaited. Julian practically threw her inside and shouted for the driver to whip the horses. As the carriage lurched forward into the London fog, Eleanor slumped against the squabs, her heart racing. "Who was that?" she demanded, her voice shaking. Julian sat opposite her, the mask of the cold Duke falling away to reveal a man who looked exhausted and dangerous. He pulled a silver flask from his coat. "That," Julian said, taking a swig, "was an assassin sent by the syndicate your father actually owes the money to. You didn't marry a duke to pay a gambling debt, Eleanor. You married me because I'm the only man in England powerful enough to start a war to keep you alive." He capped the flask and looked at her. "Welcome to the family." The journey north was a purgatory of silence. For 2 days the carriage rattled over roads that grew progressively rougher, transitioning from the cobblestones of London to the rutted dirt tracks of the Midlands, and finally the rocky, wind-swept paths of Northumberland. Julian spoke little. He spent the journey reviewing documents, his brow furrowed occasionally, glancing out the window as if expecting an ambush. Every time the carriage slowed, his hand drifted to the pistol concealed beneath his coat. Eleanor learned quickly not to ask questions. His answers were monosyllabic, designed to shut her out. When Blackwood Manor finally emerged from the mist, it looked less like a home and more like a fortress built to withstand a siege. It sat on a jagged promontory overlooking the North Sea, the grey waves crashing violently against the cliffs below. The house was a sprawl of dark stone gargoyles and ivy that had been stripped bare by the autumn winds. "It is imposing," Eleanor said, her breath fogging on the cold glass. "It is secure," Julian corrected. "That is all that matters." The carriage halted in the courtyard. The wind here was ferocious, instantly biting through Eleanor's thin London coat as she stepped out. A line of servants waited on the steps, their faces solemn. "Mrs. Galloway." Julian nodded to a severe-looking woman in black bombazine with keys rattling at her waist. "This is the Duchess. She is tired. Prepare the blue suite." "The blue suite, Your Grace." Mrs. Galloway's eyebrows raised a fraction. "Not the master's chambers, the blue suite." Julian repeated his voice, leaving no room for argument. "And Galloway, the protocols are in effect. Double the night watch." Eleanor felt a sting of humiliation. Separate rooms. Of course. He had bought a wife for cover, not for companionship. She held her head high, refusing to let the staff see her hurt. "Welcome to Blackwood, Your Grace," Mrs. Galloway said, curtsying stiffly. "If you will follow me." Eleanor was led through a cavernous entrance hall, dominated by a massive fireplace and suits of armor that looked ready to march. Her room, the blue suite, was luxurious but cold. A fire roared in the grate, yet the draught from the sea seemed to seep through the stone walls. That evening dinner was a silent affair in a dining room large enough to seat 50. Eleanor and Julian sat at opposite ends of a mahogany table that felt like a mile long. "Why are there no footmen?" Eleanor asked, her voice echoing. Julian sliced his pheasant with surgical precision. "I do not trust new faces. The staff here has been with me for a decade. They are loyal. In London, a footman can be bought for £5. Here, loyalty is bred. You live like a prisoner, my lord. I live like a man who intends to stay alive," he countered. He paused, looking down the length of the table. "There are rules you must follow, Eleanor. Listen carefully, for I will not repeat them." Eleanor put down her fork. "I am listening. First, you may roam the grounds, but never go beyond the stone wall near the cliffs. The winds are unpredictable and the drop is fatal. Second, no letters leave this house without my seal. I will read everything you write." "That is tyranny," Eleanor exclaimed. "I must write to my sisters." "You may write, but I will vet the contents to ensure you reveal nothing of our location or my schedule." And third, his eyes darkened. "You are never under any circumstances to enter the East Wing. It is locked for a reason. Do you understand? And if I refuse, then I will confine you to your room for your own safety." Eleanor glared at him. "You truly are the wolf they speak of." "Better a wolf than a sheep, Eleanor. Sheep get slaughtered." The weeks that followed were a study in isolation. Julian was a ghost in his own house, often disappearing for days at a time, riding out onto the moors or locking himself in the forbidden East Wing. Eleanor tried to occupy herself. She reorganized the library, she argued with Mrs. Galloway about the menus, and she explored every inch of the manor allowed to her. But curiosity is a dangerous thing. One night, a storm battered the coast, the thunder shaking the very foundations of Blackwood Manor. Eleanor could not sleep. The wind sounded like screaming. She lit a candle and wandered into the hallway, wrapping her dressing gown tight. She heard a sound, not the wind, but a rhythmic thumping, followed by a groan of pain. It was coming from the ground floor near the library. Heart pounding, she descended the stairs. The library door was ajar. Inside, the fire had died down to embers. Julian was there, slumped in a leather armchair. But he wasn't alone. A man Eleanor didn't recognize, a rough-looking man with a scar running down his cheek, was bandaging Julian's shoulder. There was blood. A lot of it. Eleanor gasped. Julian's head snapped up. His face was pale sweat, beading on his forehead. He grabbed a pistol from the table, leveling it at the door before he recognized her. "Get out!" he roared, wincing in pain. "You're hurt," Eleanor said, rushing forward, ignoring the weapon. She pushed past the scarred man. "Let me see." "Eleanor, leave us. It's just a scratch." "It is a gunshot wound, you stubborn fool," she cried, seeing the torn fabric of his shirt and the dark, oozing blood. "Get me hot water and brandy," she ordered the scarred man. The man looked at Julian. Julian sighed, his resistance crumbling under exhaustion. "Do as she says, Silas." As Eleanor worked, cleaning the wound, with trembling but capable hands, Julian watched her. The adrenaline of the ambush had faded, leaving him vulnerable. "Who did this?" she asked softly, tying the bandage. "Men who want what your father stole," Julian gritted out. "My father lost money. He didn't steal anything." Julian grabbed her wrist with his uninjured hand. His grip was hot, feverish. "Your father didn't just lose money, Eleanor. He was a courier for the Foreign Office who got greedy. He stole a cipher key, a code book that details the locations of British naval mines in the Mediterranean. He sold it to the syndicate." Eleanor froze. "That's impossible. He's a fool, but he's a patriot." "He is a traitor," Julian said, his voice dropping to a harsh whisper. "And the syndicate thinks you have the key. That's why I married you, to make them come to me." Eleanor pulled her hand away, horror dawning on her. "I am bait, that is all I am to you. A goat tied to a stake to lure a tiger." Julian's eyes softened a crack in the armor. He reached for her face, his thumb grazing her cheekbone. The intimacy was sudden and shocking. At first, he admitted, his voice rough. Yes, that was the plan. Use the daughter to draw out the killers, eliminate them, and retrieve the key. And now, Eleanor whispered, her heart hammering so hard she thought it might burst. Julian looked at her lips, then up to her eyes. The longing in his expression was raw, terrifying. "Now," he said, "I am realizing that putting you in danger is the only thing in this world that terrifies me. I should have sent you away. But I couldn't." He leaned in, and for a second, Eleanor thought he would kiss her. The air between them crackled with the electricity of the storm outside. But then he pulled back, grimacing as his wound stretched. "Go to bed, Eleanor. Lock your door." The revelation that her father was a traitor festered in Eleanor's mind like a poison. She couldn't reconcile the bumbling, pathetic man she knew with a mastermind selling state secrets. Julian had to be wrong, or he was lying to keep her compliant. 2 days after the shooting, Julian left the manor before dawn. Silas, his right-hand man, informed her the Duke had urgent business in York. Left alone, Eleanor decided she was done being a pawn. If her father had stolen a cipher, where would it be? Julian said the syndicate thought she had it. Why, she went to the library. She began to pull down books, looking for anything out of place. Nothing. She paced the room thinking of her father. He was a creature of habit. He loved puzzles. He loved hiding things. She remembered the day she left. He had given her nothing but a small, leather-bound prayer book. "For your salvation, Eleanor," he had said, weeping. She had thrown it into the bottom of her trunk, disgusted by his hypocrisy. She ran upstairs, tearing through her trunk until she found it. A standard Anglican book of common prayer, printed in 1885. She thumbed through the pages. Nothing. No loose papers. She sat on the bed, frustrated. She ran her thumb over the spine. It felt uneven. Her heart skipped. She took a letter opener from the desk and carefully pried at the inside binding of the leather cover. The glue was old and brittle. It cracked open. Sliding out from the spine was not a paper, but a thin metallic sheet perforated with strange holes like a punch card for a loom, but much smaller. Along with it was a folded note on thin onion skin paper. She unfolded the note. The handwriting was her father's. "My dearest Eleanor, if you are reading this, I am likely dead or in prison. I was weak. They offered me enough to clear the debts. But then they wanted more. They wanted the naval grids. This card is the overlay for the deciphering machine used by the Admiralty. I could not give it to them. I have a shred of honor left. I hid it with you because you are the only one innocent enough to carry it without suspicion. Give this to no one but Lord Rosebery himself. Trust no one. Not even the police. The syndicate has eyes everywhere. Forgive me." Eleanor dropped the note. She held the metal card up to the light. This was it. The reason assassins had stormed the church. The reason Julian had taken a bullet. She wasn't bait. She was the carrier. "Smart girl," a voice said from the doorway. Eleanor spun around. Standing there was not Mrs. Galloway or Silas. It was Sir Arthur Conan Doyle. Eleanor blinked, her mind reeling. The famous author, he was a neighbour. She knew he lived part of the year in Southsea, but frequented the north for research. He had attended a dinner at the manor once, years ago, according to the guest book. But why was he here, now holding a revolver? "Mr. Doyle," she stammered. "Dr. Doyle, actually," the man said, stepping into the room and closing the door. But his voice was wrong. The accent slipped. It wasn't the soft Scottish burr of the author. It was a rougher Cockney edge. He peeled off the fake moustache and the spectacles. It wasn't Doyle. It was the man from the church, the one in the grey coat. The assassin. "The disguise gets me through the front gates," the man sneered. "Your husband's security is tight, but they respect a celebrity." "How did you get past Silas?" Eleanor backed away toward the window. "Silas is currently taking a nap in the stables. Permanent-like." The man raised the gun. "Hand me the card, Duchess, and the note." "You killed him." Eleanor's voice shook, but her hand clenched around the metal card. "You killed Silas." "He got in the way, just like your husband will when he gets back from the wild goose chase we sent him on in York." The man took a step forward. "The card. Now. The real Sir Basil Zaharoff is waiting for it in Paris, and he is not a patient man." Zaharoff. The name struck Eleanor like a physical blow. Even in the sheltered drawing rooms of London, the name was whispered. The Merchant of Death. An arms dealer who sold machine guns to both sides of every war. If he had the British naval mine locations, he could sell safe passage to enemy fleets. He could cripple the Empire. "If I give it to you," Eleanor said, inching toward the fireplace, "you will kill me anyway. Smart and pretty. A tragedy." He cocked the hammer. Eleanor looked at the fireplace. The poker was there, heavy iron, but she was 5 feet away. He would shoot her before she reached it. "Wait!" she screamed. I don't know how to use it. Is it worth anything without the code book?" "We have the book," the man grinned. "We just need the key." Eleanor's mind raced. She needed a distraction. She looked at the heavy velvet curtains, the candle burning on the bedside table. "Here," she said, holding out the metal card. "Take it." The assassin lowered the gun slightly, reaching out with his free hand, his eyes greedy. As he stepped within range, Eleanor didn't hand it to him. She threw the metal card not at him, but directly into the roaring fire in the grate. "No!" the man screamed. The metal was thin, likely tin or zinc. It wouldn't melt instantly, but the heat would warp it, destroying the precise alignment of the holes needed for the cipher. The assassin dove toward the fire, forgetting Eleanor, forgetting the gun. He reached into the flames with his bare hand to snatch the card. Eleanor seized the heavy brass candlestick from the table and swung it with both hands, channeling every ounce of terror and rage into the blow. Crack! The brass connected with the back of the assassin's skull. He collapsed onto the hearth rug, unconscious. His hand burned the metal card sizzling on the stone next to him. Eleanor stood over him, heaving her chest tight. She didn't wait. She grabbed the hot metal card with the tongs, dropping it into a pitcher of water to cool it. She grabbed the pistol he had dropped. She ran into the hallway. "Mrs. Galloway, Mrs. Galloway." Silence. The house was dead quiet. She ran down the stairs, the pistol heavy in her hand. The front door was wide open, the wind howling through the hall. And then she saw him. Julian stood in the doorway, soaked to the bone, his coat torn mud splattered across his face. He looked wild, his eyes scanning the gloom until they landed on her. He saw the gun in her hand. He saw the blood on her dress, the assassin's blood. "Eleanor," he choked out. "He's upstairs." Eleanor said, her voice sounding like it belonged to someone else. "The man from the church. I hit him. I think he's dead." Julian crossed the distance in 2 strides, wrapping his arms around her, crushing her to his chest. He smelled of horse, sweat, rain, and gunpowder. "I rode back," he gasped against her hair. "I realized the tip in York was a decoy. I thought I was too late." "I found it, Julian." She sobbed into his coat, finally letting the tears fall. "I found the key. My father hid it in the prayer book." Julian pulled back, holding her face in his hands. He looked at her with a mixture of awe and devastation. "You saved us," he whispered. "You saved everyone." But the relief was short-lived. A low rumble began to vibrate through the floorboards. Not thunder. Not wind. Julian's head snapped toward the window. Lights were bobbing in the distance, moving up the driveway. Dozens of them. Torches. "Is it the police?" Eleanor asked. Julian watched the lights. "No. The police carry lanterns. Those are torches." He checked the load in his own pistol. "Zaharoff didn't just send one man, Eleanor. He sent a cleaning crew. He's coming to burn the house down with us inside." He turned to her, his eyes blazing. "Do you trust me? I married you, didn't I?" She managed a weak smile. "Then we have to run. Now. Into the storm." The wine cellar of Blackwood Manor smelled of damp earth and centuries of decay. The roar of the fire consuming the upper floors was a distant, terrifying rumble above their heads like a beast pacing in a cage. Julian kicked aside a heavy oak barrel, revealing a rusted iron grate in the floor. Smugglers used this 100 years ago to move French brandy. He grunted, heaving the grate open. "It leads to the sea caves below the cliffs. It is the only way out." Eleanor didn't hesitate. She gathered her skirts, currently heavy with mud and the blood of the assassin, and lowered herself into the darkness. The air down there was freezing, tasting of salt and rot. "Keep your hand on the wall," Julian whispered, dropping down beside her and pulling the grate closed. "And do not stop moving. Zaharoff's men will find the entrance soon enough." They ran through the suffocating blackness, the ground uneven and slick with slime. Eleanor slipped more than once, her knees scraping against sharp rocks, but Julian's hand was always there, hauling her up his grip, bruising but reassuring. He was injured, she could hear the ragged quality of his breathing, but he moved with the relentless drive of a man who had nothing left to lose but her. After what felt like an eternity, the air grew fresher. The sound of waves crashing against stone became deafening. They emerged from a fissure in the rock onto a narrow shingle beach at the base of the cliffs. The storm was raging in full force now. The North Sea was a churning cauldron of black water and white foam, the wind screaming so loud it drowned out thought. "We have to climb," Julian shouted over the gale, pointing to a goat path etched into the side of the cliff face. "The tide is coming in. We'll be drowned if we stay here. And if we climb, we are targets," Eleanor yelled back, pushing wet hair from her face. "Better to be shot than drowned." They began the ascent. The path was treacherous, barely wide enough for one person. The wind threatened to peel them off the rock face and hurl them into the boiling sea below. Eleanor didn't look down. She focused on Julian's boots ahead of her, on the rhythm of her own desperate breathing. They were near the top, close to the edge of the moorland, when the first shot rang out. A bullet chipped the stone inches from Eleanor's hand. She screamed, flattening herself against the wet rock. "Go!" Julian roared, shoving her upward. "Get over the ridge." She scrambled over the lip of the cliff, rolling onto the wet heather of the moors. Julian vaulted up behind her, spinning around to fire his Webley revolver back down the path. 3 men were climbing after them, mercenaries clad in dark oilskins, rifles slung over their backs. "Run, Eleanor!" Julian commanded, grabbing her arm. "Toward the lighthouse ruins. It's the only cover." They sprinted across the open moor. The rain lashed at them horizontally. Bullets whizzed past, tearing through the heather. One grazed Julian's thigh, causing him to stumble, but he didn't fall. They reached the ruins of the old lighthouse, a broken stone stump jutting out of the earth like a rotten tooth. They collapsed behind the crumbling wall, gasping for air. Julian checked his revolver. 2 rounds left, he said grimly. He looked at Eleanor. Her cream dress was ruined, her hair wild, her face streaked with soot and rain. He had never seen anything so beautiful. "Give me the card," he said, holding out his hand. What? Eleanor clutched her bodice where the cipher key was hidden. "If they take us," Julian said, his eyes intense, "they cannot have that key. I will throw it into the Devil's Drop." The Devil's Drop was a fissure in the earth, just 10 yards from the ruins, a bottomless crevasse that dropped straight into the churning sea caves. "No," Eleanor said, her voice trembling. "If we throw it away, my father died for nothing. We survived for nothing." "Eleanor, listen to me. There are 12 of them. I have 2 bullets. Logic dictates." "To hell with logic," she cried, grabbing his lapels. "You are the Wolf of Northumberland. Fight them." A shadow fell over them. "Touching," a voice sneered. They spun around. Standing atop the broken wall of the lighthouse was a man in a long trench coat, flanked by 4 armed mercenaries. It was the man Eleanor had hit with the candlestick. He had a bloody bandage wrapped around his head, and his eyes were filled with murder. "You have a heavy hand, Duchess," the assassin spat. He raised a rifle, aiming it squarely at Julian's chest. "But the game ends here. Give me the card, and I will make it quick. Refuse, and I will make you watch what I do to her before I kill you." Julian slowly stood up, placing his body in front of Eleanor. He held his hands up, the revolver dangling from one finger. "You want the card?" Julian shouted over the wind. "Come and get it." "Shoot him in the leg," the assassin ordered one of his men. Bang! Julian jerked, collapsing to one knee as a bullet tore through his calf. Eleanor screamed, lunging for him, but he shoved her back. "Stop!" Eleanor shrieked, reaching into her dress. I have it. I have the card." She pulled the metal plate out, holding it up. The lightning flashed, illuminating the perforations. The assassin smiled, blood dripping from his nose. "Bring it here." Eleanor stepped out from behind the wall. The wind whipped her dress around her legs. She walked toward the assassin, holding the card out. "Eleanor, don't—" Julian groaned, trying to stand. She ignored him. She walked until she was 5 feet from the assassin. He reached down from the wall to take it. "My father," Eleanor said, her voice strangely calm amidst the storm, was a weak man. But he taught me one thing about gambling. And what is that? The assassin mocked, his fingers brushing the metal. When you have a losing hand, Eleanor said, her eyes flashing, you flip the table. She didn't hand him the card. She flung it sideways, frisbee style, straight toward the devil's drop. The metal card caught the wind. It spun wildly, hovering for a second over the abyss. No! The assassin roared. Instinctively, greedily, he lunged for it. He leaped from the wall, his hand outstretched, trying to catch the millions of pounds fluttering away in the gale. He caught the card, but his momentum was too great. His boots slipped on the wet granite edge. He flailed, his eyes locking with Eleanor's for one terrified second. Then he vanished into the dark chasm, the cipher key clutched in his hand, falling 300 feet into the crushing waves below. The other mercenaries froze, stunned by the stupidity of their leader. In that second of hesitation, a thunderous crack echoed across the moors. Not thunder, rifles. One of the mercenaries dropped, then another. Eleanor turned. Emerging from the mist like a cavalry charge were horses, dozens of them. Men in the red uniforms of the Dragoon Guards, led by a man in a bowler hat on a black stallion. "Down, get down!" the officer shouted. The remaining mercenaries scattered, firing blindly, but they were cut down by the disciplined volley of the soldiers. Eleanor fell to her knees in the mud, crawling back to Julian. He was pale, bleeding from 2 wounds, losing consciousness. "Julian," she cried, pressing her hands against his leg to staunch the flow. "Stay with me. The army is here. You were right. You started a war." Julian's eyes fluttered open. He looked at the empty space where the assassin had fallen. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "You threw it away," he rasped. "The most valuable intelligence in the British Empire. You threw it in a hole." "I told you," Eleanor sobbed, kissing his rain-slicked forehead. "I'm not a currency, and neither are you." Julian reached up his hand, trembling, and wove his fingers through her wet hair. "Remind me," he whispered, before the darkness took him, "never to play cards with you." 2 weeks later. A safe house in Kensington, London. The room smelled of iodine-starched linens and the faint, coppery tang of blood that seemed to linger no matter how many times the maids scrubbed the floor. Julian lay in the center of the bed, his left leg elevated in a plaster, cast his shoulder bound tightly in bandages. For 10 days he had drifted in and out of a fever, muttering names of men. Eleanor didn't know ghosts from a life of violence. She was only just beginning to understand. Eleanor sat by the window reading a newspaper. The headlines were sensational. Shootout on the moors, aristocrat foils anarchist plot. The government had spun the story, erasing Zaharoff, and the cipher key replacing them with a palatable tale of heroism against nameless radicals. "You look terrible," a voice rasped from the bed. Eleanor lowered the paper. Julian was awake, his eyes clear for the first time since the cliffs. He looked gaunt, the shadow of a beard darkening his jaw, but the intensity in his gaze remained undimmed. "And you, my lord, look like a man who fell off a mountain," Eleanor replied, standing up and pouring a glass of water. She walked to the bedside, supporting his head, as he drank greedily. "The key," Julian croaked, pushing the glass away. "Did they recover it?" "The Navy dragged the sea caves for 3 days," Eleanor said softly, sitting on the edge of the mattress. "They found the body of the assassin. They found wreckage. But the cipher key. The tides of the North Sea are unforgiving, Julian. It is gone, buried under silt or carried to the Arctic." Julian fell back against the pillows, closing his eyes. A long, heavy silence stretched between them. "Then I have failed," he whispered. I traded the safety of the Empire for us. You didn't fail, Eleanor said, her voice fierce. Lord Rosebery visited yesterday. He told me the Admiralty has already reissued the naval codes. Zaharov has nothing but a wet piece of tin at the bottom of the ocean. And because you exposed his agents, his network in England has been dismantled. You won. Julian looked at her, searching her face. I didn't do it for the Admiralty, Eleanor. When I saw him reach for you, the codes didn't matter. The title didn't matter. He reached out his rough, calloused fingers, brushing against her hand. I realized I would burn the entire British Navy to ash if it meant keeping you breathing. Eleanor's heart skipped. It was the closest thing to a declaration of love a man like Julian Thorne was capable of making. There is one other matter, Eleanor said, her tone hardening. My father is downstairs. He has been here every day, demanding to see the heroic Duchess. Julian's expression turned to stone. Send him up. Lord Arthur Sterling entered the room with the hesitant shuffle of a man who knows he is walking into a lion's den. He looked older, his clothes disheveled. When he saw Eleanor, his face crumpled into a mask of pathetic relief. Eleanor, my dear girl. He moved to embrace her, but Eleanor stepped back, her posture rigid. Arthur froze. He looked past her to the bed where the Duke of Blackwood lay, watching him with eyes like chips of flint. Your Grace, Arthur stammered. Thank God you are alive. The papers, they say you are a national hero. And Eleanor, to think my little girl helping to save the crown. Sit down, Arthur, Julian commanded. It wasn't a suggestion. Arthur sank into the chair Eleanor had vacated. I only came to see if you were well. And perhaps to discuss the future. Now that the unpleasantness is over, and your position is so elevated, I thought. You thought what? Eleanor interrupted, her voice, cutting like glass, that you would move into Blackwood Manor, that you would bask in the glory of the husband you sold me to. Sold? Arthur scoffed, dabbing his forehead with a handkerchief. Harsh words, Eleanor. It was an arrangement. And look how it turned out. You are a duchess. You are wealthy. You are safe. Safe? Eleanor laughed, a cold, brittle sound. I was hunted across the moors by mercenaries because of your theft. I killed a man, father. I watched him fall into the abyss. Do not speak to me of safety. She walked to the writing desk and picked up a heavy envelope, sealed with the crest of the Prime Minister. She tossed it into her father's lap. What is this? Arthur asked, his hands trembling. A one-way ticket to a steamer bound for Nova Scotia, Eleanor said, and a deed to a small, very modest farm outside of Halifax. Arthur looked up, pale. Canada, you are banishing me. Julian wanted to put you in Newgate prison, Eleanor said calmly. He wanted to see you hang for treason. I convinced him otherwise. Not for your sake, but because I do not wish to wear mourning black for a father who died to me the day he signed that marriage contract. Arthur looked at Julian, seeking mercy. He found none. You leave tomorrow, Julian rumbled. If you are found on English soil after sunrise on Friday, the protection is lifted, and my wolves will find you. Arthur Sterling looked at his daughter one last time. He saw no trace of the obedient girl who used to darn his socks and hide his gin bottles. He saw a stranger, steel-spined and unforgiving. He stood up, clutching the envelope. He didn't say goodbye. He simply turned and shuffled out of the room, fading from their lives like a bad dream. 2 months later. The Royal Opera House, London. The season had begun in earnest, and the appearance of the Duke and Duchess of Blackwood was the only thing anyone was talking about. As they entered the royal box, the murmuring of the crowd below was audible, a sea of whispers rising to the velvet-draped balcony. Julian walked with a cane, now a silver-headed ebony stick that only added to his menacing allure. He wore severe black evening wear, contrasting sharply with Eleanor's gown of crimson silk, a colour no debutante would dare wear, but which a powerful duchess could command. They sat the heavy curtains partially shielding them from the hundreds of opera glasses trained in their direction. "They are waiting for a show," Julian murmured, leaning close to her. "They want to know if the beast truly tamed the beauty, or if she is merely his prisoner." Eleanor opened her fan, looking out at the glittering chandelier. "Let them wonder. We leave for the north in the morning. I care little for their gossip." "I care," Julian said. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. He placed it on the railing of the box in plain sight of the audience below. "What is that?" Eleanor asked. "The Sterling family ring," Julian said. "I bought it back from the pawnbroker your father sold it to 5 years ago." Eleanor's breath caught. It was her mother's ring, a sapphire surrounded by small diamonds. "I never asked you properly," Julian said, his voice low, intimate, ignoring the orchestra tuning up below. "I bought you. I forced you. I dragged you into a war. But I never asked." He turned in his chair, wincing slightly as his leg shifted, and took her hand. "Eleanor, would you do me the extraordinary honor of marrying me, not for debt, not for duty, but because I cannot breathe when you are not in the room?" Tears pricked Eleanor's eyes. She looked at the man who had terrified her only months ago, seeing now the fierce loyalty and deep wounded love beneath the armor. "Yes," she whispered. "1,000 times yes." Julian smiled, a true devastating smile. He slipped the ring onto her finger. Then he leaned forward, conscious that half of London was watching through their binoculars. He didn't kiss her. Instead, he brushed his lips against the sensitive skin just below her earlobe. "Do you know what the best part of this scandal is?" he whispered, his voice vibrating through her. "What?" she breathed. "Tonight when we get home," he murmured, his words dark and promising, "I don't have to sleep in the blue suite. And I intend to make sure you don't sleep at all." The shock of his words, so bold, so explicitly wicked, hit her instantly. For a heartbeat, Eleanor stared ahead, stunned. Then the blood rushed to her face. A deep, vivid, crimson blush started at her neck and flooded her cheeks, visible even to the people in the cheap seats. She brought her fan up to hide her face, but it was too late. The crowd saw it. The Duke had whispered something to his Duchess, and she had blushed like a schoolgirl. Julian chuckled a low rumble of triumph. He sat back, satisfied, resting his hand possessively over hers on the velvet railing. The lights dimmed. The overture began. But Eleanor didn't hear the music. She only felt the warmth of his hand and the thrill of the life that waited for them, a life not of debts and ledgers, but of passion and the wild, free winds of Northumberland. She lowered her fan, turned to her husband, and for the first time in her life, she didn't lower her eyes. She smiled. "You are a wicked man, Julian Thorne." "I know," he replied, winking. "That's why you love me." And that is the incredible twisted tale of Eleanor and Julian. They started as enemies in a transaction of debt, but ended as partners in a war for the fate of an empire. Eleanor didn't just save her husband, she saved herself, proving that sometimes the most dangerous weapon in a fight isn't a gun. It's the courage to flip the table when the odds are stacked against you. Now I have a question for you guys. If you were Eleanor standing on that cliff with the cipher key, would you have handed it over to save your love, or thrown it into the abyss like she did? Let me know your choice in the comments below. If you enjoyed this story of betrayal, romance, and high-stakes history, please smash that. Like button it really helps the channel grow. And don't forget to subscribe and ring the bell so you never miss a new story. We release new historical dramas every Tuesday and Friday. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next chapter.